our friend there, analyst at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Ivana Stradner, she joins me. Ivana, thanks for being with us here on this Thursday. What are the Finnish and Estonian authorities doing about this? What does their investigation look like? They're saying that power supply isn't going to be affected by this, but concerning nonetheless, right?
Thank you very much for having me. Indeed, Finnish police is right now investigating whether a Russian ship was indeed involved in the sabotage of an electricity cable running between Finland and Estonia, as you have just explained. So there is still limited information what we know right now about investigation, and the EU has already threatened with further measures to figure out, what happened, because indeed the Christmas Day was very busy for Russia, given that the Eastlink 2 submarine cable that carried that electricity from Finland to Estonia was disconnected from the grid. And you're right, even though it did not pose a massive threat immediately, to any of the Baltic states, we have to understand this from a bigger perspective, that this is the part of Russia's hybrid war. Because, look, I understand that a lot of people like to perceive Putin in the West from the Western eyes, but for Putin, this war is indeed a war against the West. And he doesn't need to use tanks and jets to any of those countries, because all he needs to do is to use hybrid warfare activities, including this one that we just saw in Finland, using sabotage to undermine the West. You mentioned the one in 2022, and I think it's tremendously important to note, because the Western intelligence has warned about sabotage activities, which is part of Russia hybrid warfare. And this is just below the threshold of war. So it's not something that can easily invoke Article 5, because that's exactly what Putin doesn't want. He doesn't want to fight NATO directly. Sure. But this is something very concerning, because indeed it puts the West on the defensive and trying actually to show, that it's Russia behind that, while Russia is using immediately all propaganda tools in the West, but also in Russia and in the global South, to show actually that this is just the part of Western propaganda. And it's not only, all those sabotage regarding cables. What I worry about, given the latest reports coming from the United Kingdom, as well as the Baltic states about sabotage, it's not only going to be through the cables. We have also elections in Germany. We also have a lot of other opportunities for Russia to sabotage the West, including other nefarious activities.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting. Obviously, right now, the investigation is still very, very new and premature. And we'll just have to wait and see whether or not there is any evidence that links, Russian actors to this latest instance. But the one in September of 2022 that devastated and destroyed the pipelines, the Nord Stream pipelines between Russia and Germany, those were natural gas pipelines. We know in the wake of that how difficult it was for some of these countries, NATO countries, to cooperate with each other to find out the culprit. Germany, Norway, Denmark, and then we got the news just a couple of months ago that an arrest warrant for a Ukrainian diver was issued in relation to that there, possibly highlighting Ukraine's involvement or entities emanating from Ukraine, their involvement in the Nord Stream pipeline situation here. So this is very murky. How will they get to the bottom of this?
So that's exactly the part why Russia's hybrid warfare should be taken seriously, because there are activities that are hard to prove. And let's not forget that Putin is indeed a KGB guy. He's not a military guy, and he understands very well that using all those sorts of activities that are right below the threshold of war, but powerful enough to show that there is a problem in the West, is all he really needs to do to challenge the West. And you're right. all of those countries have faced numerous difficulties in terms of cooperation. And that's something that I worry, that might be even with further activities. But nevertheless, there are still, some reports that also point out at Russia's involvement in this activity. So, but it's too early, to claim anything with certainty.
Yeah, the BBC has this report today that Finnish police are investigating whether a Russian ship was involved in the sabotage of this cable, this electricity cable. The authorities, according to the BBC, said today they believe the anchor of the Eagle S, it's a tanker registered with the Cook Islands, may have damaged this cable. It's known as the S-Link 2 cable, and it became disconnected just yesterday. The vessel, the BBC says, is thought to be part of Russia's quote-unquote shadow fleet, and we can get into what that means. They say it's made up of ships that carry embargoed Russian oil products here. What's the, scope of this shadow fleet? Do we know?
I mean, that's also in part why the European Union has decided to go after that, because of the whole idea behind the sanctions. But I also wanted to emphasize one important thing related to shadow fleets and all those cable activities. Even though that Russia might not roll on tanks and jets in any of those countries, those particular activities make citizens in those countries nervous, which is exactly what Putin wants, to cause chaos inside those countries, basically then to make sure, that any of those countries do not support Ukraine out of fear of escalation, because that's part of Russia's hybrid warfare. It's something that is invisible to many people and who are not following those activities very closely. But as you have pointed out, that sort of deception where we don't know exactly who was behind that, we do not know all those details, is exactly what makes things very murky. And on the other hand, one thing that Russia has always been good at is making sure to pretend to be the victim of this whole situation. So they already launched full influence operations, basically claiming that this is a pure Western propaganda, that they have nothing related to this and nothing involved into that. But look, Finland has suffered. This is not the first sabotage activity since 2022. And make no mistake, there will be more, unfortunately, activities in the Baltic states similar to this one, right below the threshold of war.
Yeah, and of course, we know in the course of this war, Finland did join NATO alongside its neighbor Sweden as well, rankling Putin. Let's move from the Baltics now, though, to the Caucasus. Ivana, we've been following just this tragic set of circumstances there in Kazakhstan. Just some video there. This was an Azerbaijan Airlines flight. It crashed yesterday in Kazakhstan. It killed 38 people. What's so interesting about this, because I've covered a lot of plane crashes, is that there were about 28 survivors there after this crash here. But we're talking about the Finland situation, and that's still murky, and that's very preliminary on whether or not Russia was involved here. The pieces are coming together about potential Russian involvement or inadvertent involvement in this today, Ivana. Reuters has this, that one of the Azerbaijani sources familiar with this investigation into the crash told Reuters that the preliminary results showed the plane was struck by a Russian Pantsir-S air defense system, and its communications were paralyzed by electronic warfare systems on the approach into Grozny there in Chechnya. That was the final destination for this flight. It came down near the Kazakh city of Aktau there. What more do we know about this? That's new reporting from Reuters. They have a source directly saying a Russian air defense system took this plane down. Why? Or was this a mistake?
So indeed, as you have noticed, very little has been officially known when Azerbaijan Airlines flight was traveling for Azerbaijani capital Baku to Grozny that was shot. Some experts actually suggest, that this plane had been hit by a Russian air defense system over Chechnya. The official cause, as I mentioned, is still unknown. But here, Moscow has repeatedly used actually air defense defense systems against Ukrainian drone strikes. And that's why some people claim that this could be just another accident coming from Russia. As I mentioned, there is very little official information that we know so far, but what we do know that Russia's aviation watchdog stated, that they claimed that the pilot actually had some emergency landing after a bird strike. Immediately, Russia's government stated that it would be absolutely unacceptable and wrong to speculate about the cause of the plane crash before an investigation had been carried out. But one thing that I'm very comfortable to say, and with a lot of certainty, even if Russia was involved in this, they will not take responsibility. That's something that we saw in the past, and I'm afraid that's something that we will see again if official investigation is carried out, and if we find out that Russia was behind this. I also think it's tremendously important not to forget. I don't want to make, any parallels, but I think it is important to some extent to remind people that this year marks 10 years of Malaysia Airlines flight that was shot down over eastern Ukraine in territory controlled by Russia, that almost 300 people actually died. And then several years later, a joint investigation team found that aircraft was actually shot by Russian surface-to-air missile fire from, that territory.
So are you drawing parallels there? You see hallmarks in this latest plane crash from what happened in 2014 with that Malaysian airliner over Ukraine? You see hallmarks?
I did not see that, but in 2022, there was an investigation actually that found out that some people from Russia proxy were involved. Russia never took responsibility. Sure. And that's why I firmly believe that if we find out that this particular incident today was the part of Russia, whether a pure accident or not, I doubt that Russia will take responsibility. And there's something like that, it's hard really to even imagine that Russia can be a responsible cooperation ally with the West.
Ivana, that was my next question, though. I mean, its final destination was in Chechnya, there in Grozny. So presumably, I was going to ask, will Russian aviation authorities at least contribute to the investigation into what actually happened here? Do you think there's going to be cooperation on that front? I'm not talking about taking culpability. We're not even there yet, if that is the case. But will they help figure out what's going on and how this plane came down?
If the Malaysia accident is any indication, I doubt that Putin is going to cooperate with the West or any independent investigation on this. It is not in his interest to take responsibility, especially given what is happening right now with the war of aggression in Ukraine. He absolutely has no incentive to take responsibility. What worries me even more is that he's just going to use another campaign using influence operations, actually blaming the West for making up a new story against Russia and pretending to be a victim. That's a more likely scenario that we can expect.
Yeah, and of course, the difference between these two plane crashes we're talking about, this one yesterday, though, it has survivors, and presumably whether the investigation goes from here, those survivors will be interviewed, I would imagine, about the horrible experience they went through. We'll just have to wait and see. Ivana, thank you so much for your time, and we hope you had a great Christmas. We'll talk soon.
Thank you very much for inviting me.